The church St. Nikolai and St. Panteleimon, better known as the Boyana Church, is under the auspices of UNESCO and was enlisted as World Cultural Heritage in 1979. It had been an active church until 1954. Since 2004, it has been a branch of the National Historic Museum. The church has three distinct periods in its history. A small cross-in-square church was erected in the period from the 9th through the 11th century, and in the 12th century it was reconstructed. It was dedicated to Saint Nikolai. By the mid-13th century, during the reign of Tsar Constantine and Tsarina Irene Laskarina, the daughter of the Byzantine Emperor Theodore II, Ducas Laskaris, and granddaughter of the Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Asen II, the local ruler Sebastocrata Kaloyan and his wife Desislava added to the older church a domed narthex and a cross-in-square chapel on the second floor, dedicated to Saint Panteleimon, also known as Saint Pantaleon. The second building is actually a rare two-story chapel, cum sepulchre. Antique and medieval stone fragments were built into the stone walls, whereas the facades were embellished with ceramic decorations. By the mid-19th century, the Boyana residents added another two-story narthex. The first fresco-style painting layer in the Boyana church dates back to the 12th century and has only been partially recovered, as it was laid upon by the later paintings of 1259. Fragments of the apse hierarchs, of Christ's crucifixion, as well as the portraits of Saint John Damascene, Saint Cosma Mayumski of Jerusalem, God's Mother of the Annunciation scene, and an unknown prophet were preserved in the naos, whereas the facade, on either side of the entrance, exhibits the portraits of Christ and Saint Nikolai. These fragments are among the few remnants of the 12th century Bulgarian painting. The church was entirely redecorated in 1259. This was an era of dramatic political and cultural upheavals on the Balkans. Between 1204 and 1261, Constantinople was under Latin imperial rule, and hence the Bulgarian capital Trnovo reinvented itself into a foremost cultural center of the East Orthodox world. Having long been perceived as the epitome of Bulgarian medieval art, the Boyana mural is not only the primary artifact of our church painting, but also the most representative piece of the 13th century East Orthodox art. The painting was made by Bulgarian icon painters, who were probably summoned in from Trnovo specifically for the task, and is the only entirely preserved artifact, revealing the nature of the 13th century art of the Tsar's court and the capital city. The inscriptions throughout the church are only in Bulgarian language. The murals are styled in the fresco secco technique and were the work of at least 3 icon painters. Some preparatory charcoal drawings were found on the facade of the Kaloyan narthex in 2008, together with a caption reading "I, Vasilie, painted," which was arguably the signature of one of the icon painters. The sponsor's inscription on the narthex's north wall read, "This purest shrine of Nicola, the saintly hierarch of Christ, and the saintly glorious martyr Panteleimon, was raised from the ground and created due to the efforts and work and the great love of Kaloyan, a Sebastocrator, a cousin of the Tsars, the grandson of Stefan, the Serbian king. It was decorated under the Bulgarian kingdom, ruled by the devout and chaste and Christ-loving Tsar Constantine Asen, in Diction 7, in the year 67-67. In general terms, the naos follows the already established canonical scheme for a cross-domed church decoration. Christ, sustainer of the world, or Pantocrator, in a circular design, medallion, supported by angels, is featured in the dome. The 4 evangelists are just under this composition, and the 4 sides, under the dome, feature 4 depictions of Christ. The Virgin Mary, with the infant, is seated on a throne in the apse. The images of the protodeacons Saint Stephen, the proto-martyr, Saint Laurentius, and Saint Eupel stand on either side of the apse. The evangelical cycle fills the walls and the arches. By dint of an original decision, the icon painter has mirrored scenes of Christ's childhood with scenes from Christ's passions, with the 2 sets of scenes having thematic and symbolic connections. The Annunciation scene is traditionally set on both sides of the apse. The portrait of the Archangel Gabriel is especially fascinating as his wings are embellished with multiple color peacock feathers, a supposedly Eastern influence in iconography. Gabriel's face is one of the most riveting ones in the whole church. A 1987 restoration recovered the portrait of the church's patron, Saint Nicholas, to the right of the apse, on the southeastern pillar. This image carries the most reliable information about the original colors, as it was spared the atmospheric influences and has not been affected by the multiple restorations. Christ is depicted on the northeastern pillar and given the rare qualification of Evergitis, or benefactor. The compositions are scanty on detail and have a monumental effect, the focus being on the principal characters and events. The portraits and their expressions are individualized to emphasize the importance and symbolism of the events. The naos's bottom section features mostly warrior saints' figures. This specific choice corresponds to the figure sets preserved in family chapels of Trnovo boyars. The preference for warrior saints can be explained with the desire of these feudal lords to attract patrons of military commanders and strongmen into the family hearths. Regardless of the naos' small size, we see a whole gallery of unique imagery conveying a variety of states and emotions. Suffice to compare Christ's portraits in various scenes to figure out that none of them is like the rest. The narthex presumably was functioning as a burial chapel. The erection of the arcosolia, or window graves, on both the northern and the southern wall corroborate this. Virgin Mary with infant Jesus is featured in the lunette above the door, with her parents, the saints Joachim and Anne, on either side. The figures of Christ, qualified as Chalkitis, and Saint Nikolai, each stand on either side of the entrance. The imagery of the bottom layer is well preserved underneath these two figures. Christ had been painted under the later Saint Nikolai portrait, whereas an earlier Saint Nikolai emerges under the Christ image of the latter layer. The images of Christ Chalkitis and Christ Evergitis in the narthex emulate a few well-known Constantinople miraculous icons. The sponsors' portraits are set across from one another on the south and north narthex walls. Sebastocrator Kaloyan and his wife Desislava are featured on the south wall, next to the sponsor's inscription. Facing right, Kaloyan is holding a fairly accurate model of the church, passing it over to Saint Nikolai. Desislava is also turned right, her hands lifted up at chest level in supplication, the right hand thumb stretching a cord, holding fast the tails of her mantle, a gesture that saw substantial currency throughout Western Europe at the time. Her head is slightly bowed. The face oval exhibits a fine contour. Both Kaloyan and Desislava are individualized, humane and vital, thus showcasing the humanistic trends of a later period. Unlike them, the whole figure portraits of Tsar Constantin Asen-Tikh and Tsarina Irene are represented up front in a still position, following strictly the formulaic way of representing Byzantine rulers. Apart from the sponsors' figures, the bottom section also features saintly ones, for instance the earliest known portrait of Saint Ivan Rilsky, the 10th century founder of Bulgarian monasticism and one of the most revered Bulgarian saints. Saint Nedelya and Saint Petka are depicted on either side of the entrance gate. Saint Ivan Rilsky's and Saint Petka's relics were brought from Turnovo in mid-13th century, and their presence in the church was a consequence of the powerful cult they enjoyed in the capital city. The scene of the introduction of God's Mother into the shrine, an original 1259 painting, was discovered in 1992 in the North Arcosoleum after stripping down an upper layer 14th century mural depicting the same scene. The mid-Pentecost or mid-feast scene, where Jesus is in the shrine among the scribes, is in the South Arcosoleum, striking our attention with the highly individualized and expressive faces of Jewish sages. Eight scenes from the life story of Saint Nikolai are presented in two bands in the top part. This is one of the most detailed life legend cycles of the saint in monumental painting, including scenes like the carpet miracle, which were little known outside Constantinople. The Saint Nicholas cult was revitalized and enriched after 1087, when his relics were translated from Myra, where he was a bishop, to Bari. This event, alongside the Crusaders' presence on the Balkans, led to the adoption of some Western iconography influences, visible not only in details like clothing, shields, ships, architectural elements, etc., but in the overall structuring of the compositions as well. In general terms, what makes the 1259 Boyana church paintings unique and turns them into artifacts of primary importance is the focus on individuality and psychology, enabling them to convey subtle emotions and traits of the characters featured in various scenes. The St. Panteleimon Chapel, on the church's second floor, is a cross-domed structure with partially preserved murals, which differ in style and were made by another icon painter, even though they date back to the same period. Their choice and selection were based on the building's functioning as a courtyard, chapel and sepulchre. The Boyana church art puts on display a number of innovations. Despite being the first phase of the humanistic trends blossoming much later in the 14th century, in the art of the so-called Paleologos Renaissance, the church's paintings have preserved the monumental and clear forms of compositions that mark the previous art period.